And today we're halfway through the series. It's part 4, Miracles Since Israel Became a Nation. And I mentioned before that Wayne and I are trying to support some of the small businesses in Israel because there's a lot of boycotts on their products. And so we're trying to buy things and share it with you. And today we have more tea. The last time we brought tea, it was David Ross's tea. He was in Israel studying forestry. He's getting his master's degree. And what he noticed is in Israel they have lots of medicinal plants. And like in biblical times, that's what they would have used for their medicine, is medicinal plants. Like that's why when Jesus was born, he was given frankincense and myrrh, because that's the sap from a tree, and they use it for medicine. And some people even think that like he was given gold, and some people are wondering if that was actually turmeric, because in Jesus' time, turmeric was used as a medicine. It's a very powerful medicine, and it's called the gold spice, and it was more expensive than gold in Jesus' time, turmeric. So we're not sure if it's gold or turmeric. But anyway, the last time we brought tea in, it was tea from plants that grow around Jerusalem. And this time the tea is from medicinal plants that grow around Mount Carmel. So there's lots of stuff in there. There's rosemary and raspberry leaf and savory. There's lots of different things in it. It's good for you. And this David Ross, we have his picture on the table where the tea is. He's very health conscious, and he said he's very careful about when he makes his tea. He doesn't put anything in it, just the plants. So it's the plants soaking in water, steeping in water. And he's even careful when he makes the tea bags. He said often tea bags have chemicals in them, and he doesn't put strings on the tea bags or staples. So that's what he does anyway. He calls them tea pillows. So that's what we're going to have. And then the last time we had tea, we didn't have any dessert to go with the tea because our shipment didn't come in, so we had local donuts. But this time the shipment did come in. We're going to give you some halva. That's a popular dessert in Israel. I had some when I was there, and I just had it once. I thought it was okay. But they said, like, if you go to Israel, you have to have halva. So I have the package here, and it has the ingredients in it if you need to look at it for allergy purposes, because this is what you'll be given, little packages, and it's all written in Hebrew. So if you need to know what's in it, I have this package, and it has the English language on it. You can see what's in it. And it's made from sesame seeds. They grind up sesame seeds, and they make a paste, and then they sweeten it. And then they'll put other things in for flavor. This particular one, the red one, it has cocoa beans in it, so it's halva with cocoa beans. And this beige color one, that's halva with vanilla beans. And then there's a green one. This is a halva with pistachio nuts in it. So there's lots of it back there. You can try different flavors and see if you like it. Okay, so we'll move on. Oops. Okay, there's our different series we were doing. We already finished the first 3. That big promise God gave to Abraham in Genesis, and the promise that he's still working on today. And we talked about Jesus in the Holy Land in the week 2, and then Jerusalem. And for today, it's miracles since Israel became a nation, because currently God's working in Israel. He's doing miraculous things there. He's preparing for the return of Christ. So this week and next week, we're going to see all the changes that have happened since Israel became a nation. And then after that, we'll go on to the Dead Sea and the Dead Sea Scrolls, because even the Dead Sea is changing. There's miraculous changes happening in the Dead Sea. And then part 7 is titled Blessed to Become a Blessing, because God promises that he'll bless us if we bless the Jewish people. And they're going to bless us. That's what God is working on now. He tells us that the Jewish people are going to fill the world with fruit. So he's going to use them to bless us. And then the last part, it's the importance of praying for Israel. And, I'll go back to the tea. I have a note here. The tea that David Ross has, it's called shalva tea. And he says that shalva, that's a Hebrew word for peace and calmness and tranquility. He said it's mentioned in Psalm 127, verse 7. which says, "May there be peace between your walls, shelter within your palaces." So the generation that returns home, that's what's happening today in Israel. After a 2,000-year period of the Jewish people being scattered from one end of the earth to the other, they started returning to their homeland, which is the land of Israel. And this is fulfilling a promise that God made them many times throughout the Bible. And in 1950, Israel passed a law that allows every Jew the right to come to Israel. It's called the Law of Return. And then in 1970, they changed the law a little bit so that if anyone had like a Jewish grandparent, they're welcome to come and live in Israel. Or even if they married someone that's Jewish, then they can come and live in Israel. And that David Ross that makes the tea, he's from the United States, and his mother is an American Jew. So now he lives in Israel. Earlier we were just talking about blessing the Jewish people. Our church started blessing the Jews many years ago. It's when we were on the Rory Road. I remember Karen Litton suggested that our church support the Jewish people, because that's what she does. So that's when our church started supporting the Jewish people, and we send money every month to this organization. It's called International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. So every month, part of our money that we are given goes to them. And my mother contacted them and asked them like if they could send us some pictures. So some of the pictures in this slide are ones that they sent us. And they also sent us a gift. I was going to give you that in the week 8, the gift that they sent us. So anyway, these are Canadians that are coming to Israel to start their new life. So they're leaving countries where they were, and now they're coming to Israel, the promised land, to start a new life. So the generation that returns home, God's promise. The Lord your God will bring you into the land that your ancestors possessed, and you will possess it. He will make you more prosperous and numerous than your ancestors. And that's in Deuteronomy 30, verse 5. And when the Jewish people do return, they always have a big celebration. They'll have volunteers in Israel that'll meet them at the airport and have a big celebration. So that's what they're doing there now. They have a sign, throwing confetti on them. They make it a big deal. And here's another one, another celebration of a lady that's a Jewish lady, and she's moving to Israel for the first time. And there's also a program in place to help the Jewish people start their new life in Israel. And it begins right there at the airport terminal with a big celebration to make them feel welcomed. And then after that, they will give them a tour around Israel so they can see the surroundings, and they have programs in place to help them learn the Hebrew language. And this one, an important day in history. When I was doing all these 8 sessions, there's over 400 slides, and I have 2 of my top favorites. One is in week 8, and this is my other favorite, my 2 very favorite pictures. It's a picture that I found online, and it says, "This return of the Jewish people all started with this well-remembered vote of the United Nations." And I love this picture. Sometimes I just sit and stare at it, and I just wonder, like, what was going on in that room that day. Because you know those men, they're fighting a big spiritual battle because there's lots of promises in the Old Testament about the Jewish people returning home. And we know the enemy wouldn't want that to happen. So these men, different leaders around the world, they're getting together and they're going to vote on whether the Jewish people should be allowed to come to the promised land. So that was a big, important vote. And I don't know if you can make it out here, but that one right there is Syria. You can go online and see how different ones voted. Syria, they voted no. They didn't think the Jewish people should go back to the promised land. And I remember before this vote, Britain was very compassionate toward the Jewish people, and they thought they need to have their homeland. They thought maybe they could go to Africa. We could help them go to Africa and have land so they can all be together. Yeah, but anyway, it worked out so the Jewish people can go back to their homeland. And this one right here, that's the former USSR. I'm just trying to read them. Some of the print's really small. This one right here, you can see that one, that's the United States. I know they voted yes. And I think that one's Costa Rica. And there's Belgium and Brazil and China and right here, Colombia. And I couldn't find the Canadian one. They must be there somewhere because Canada voted yes. I remember Canada voted yes, and Australia voted yes, and the United States and the Dominican Republic. They voted yes for the Jewish people to be allowed to come back to their homeland. And the part that I really like is this guy right here. That's the President of the United States. It was President Truman at the time. And when we were in Israel, the last part of the trip, we went to this museum and we learned about the President Truman. And he was very compassionate regarding the Jewish people. It's all because of the Holocaust, and he wanted to help them. And it reminds me of their current president now, like he's doing all he can to help the Jewish people. So that's what he was doing. He was very instrumental in this whole thing happening, this whole process, because he wanted the Jewish people to move back to their homeland, because he thought it would be safer. He said the world has to be a safer place for the Jewish people. So anyway, after the vote, the outcome of the vote was a yes vote, so the Jewish people could go back. There was a chief rabbi that came to the White House to talk to this President Truman, and he said, he looked at him and he said, God, he put you in your mother's womb so that you would be an instrument for this to happen. And then they said tears was rolling down his cheeks when he said that to him. So I just think right there, like, I look at him and he must be stressed or worried. And then I looked and I thought, well, maybe he's praying. I know he has a Baptist background. Maybe he's praying. And he had a lot on his shoulders at the time, because in the United States, they were a lot of people were on his back saying, like, you can't do this. You can't recognize Palestine, which is Israel then. He said, we can't recognize that as a Jewish state, because if we do, the Arabs, they promised that they would declare war, which they did the day after this vote, and they also said that they're going to cut off the oil supply. So this man would have been under a lot of pressure at that moment. So, like, maybe he's praying right there, I'm not sure. But just different times I just sit and look at that picture and wonder what's going on. And then another thing I read was a prime minister at Israel came to visit this President Truman another time, and he said that you will always be in the history of Israel for what you did for us. And he thanked him, and they said that this president, he just started crying. And then after that meeting, he had to go out and meet the press, and the press was like asking the Prime Minister of Israel, like, what did you say to our president? We can tell he's been crying. So anyway, I'll move on. So this is the outcome of that vote. In 1947, the United Nations voted in favor of dividing the land of Israel, which was then called Palestine. They're dividing it into two states. Part would be an Arab state, and part would be for the Jewish populations. And here's a map right here. You can see the yellow part, that's the Arab part, and the orange part, that's where the Jewish people could live. So they had to share that land. And it's changed since then because there was another war in 1967, but that's what it initially was. So God promised all of that land to the Jewish people, but this was a start. It's hope for them. They can come back to the promised land and live in parts of it. So the land of Israel has always been a place in the minds of the Jews. For centuries, they have longed for a Jewish state after they were forced from their land. Their ancestors have dreamed of, hoped for, and prayed continuously for their own homeland. After many generations of Jews praying for the opportunity to return to Israel, it's happening today during our generation. So there's some Jews just arriving in Israel, having a big celebration. And it was in the year 1948, the year after that important United Nations vote, when Israel miraculously became a nation. That was in May 14th, 1948. And there's a picture of the Israeli flag In the background, you can see the Dead Sea. That was on top of a rocky mountain in the middle of a desert, and that's Jody standing in front of the flag. This was the opportunity that the Jews had been waiting for. They finally could have a homeland of their own after generations of Jewish people living in various countries around the world for 2,000 years. So now the door was open. They can come and live in their promised land. And it was in 1948 that there were 650,000 Jews who returned to Israel. And then in May of 2019, that's the last time I checked, I did this slide in May. In May of 2019, there were over 6 million Jews living in Israel, and the exact number in May was 6,738,500 Jews living in Israel. That's quite an increase. So there's 74.8% of the people that reside in Israel are Jewish people. And that's a picture that that lady sent us from the International Fellowship of Christian and Jews. She sent us that picture because when we send them money, part of the money is used to help people fly to Israel to live there, and they give children school supplies. They help out with numerous things. This is one of the things they were doing. They were giving this Jewish man a bowl of soup because they feed them. And they help feed people that survived the Holocaust too. So never in history has there been such a population explosion. And it's all because God promised it would happen. So God's Spirit is drawing them back, and we are the generation that gets to see this biblical prophecy being fulfilled. And this is a Jewish man. This is a picture taken that our photographer took. It's in the Jewish part of Jerusalem. We talked about that last week, how it's divided into sections, different quarters. And there's a verse in Ezekiel 36:24. It says, "For I will take you from among the nations, gather you out from all countries, and bring you into your own land." And there's tons of promises in the Bible about these Jewish people returning. And another one in Isaiah 43, verse 5 and 6. It says, "Fear not, for I am with you. I will bring your descendants from the east and gather you from the west. I'll say to the north, give them up, and to the south, do not keep them back." So that's what's happening today. They're all coming from all ends of the earth. And we mentioned before that when the Jewish people come, it's a custom for them to bend down and kiss the ground. That's what they're doing. They just get off the airplane, they're at the airport, and they're kissing the ground. They're so happy to be there. Another verse in Jeremiah 30, verse 3. It says, "For the time is coming when I will restore the fortunes of my people of Israel and Judah. I will bring them home to this land that I gave their ancestors, and they will possess it again. I, the Lord, have spoken." And another verse, there was just so many of them, I just put a small handful of them in here. Ezekiel 39, verse 27 to 29. "Once I brought them back from foreign parts, gathered them from the enemy territories, I'll use them to demonstrate my holiness with all the nations watching. Then they'll realize for sure that I am their God, for even though I sent them off into exile, I will gather them back to their own land, leaving not one soul behind." So as we can see, the Bible has repeated that promise of the Jews returning to the promised land many times. We are also told that this time, after the Jews come back to their land, that was promised to them, they will be there to stay. Because in Amos 9, verse 15, it says, "I will plant them in their land, and they shall never again be uprooted out of the land that I have given them, says the Lord your God." And that's a picture I found online. That's Jerusalem Day. They celebrate that every year, Jerusalem Day. So there's another picture of a man that's kissing the ground. It's a custom for the Jews to kiss the ground when they arrive in Israel. It is clear to see that God's supernatural spirit is drawing the Jews back so that they will reside in Israel, the land that is rightfully theirs. And that little boy there says, "Israel is my future." That's what it has on the shirt. It's cute. And I remember the first session I showed a world map and I tried to draw a circle around Israel. And I did it here again, trying to draw a circle around Israel. And I tried many times. I would draw it and then I'd erase it and try it again. I just couldn't draw one small enough. It's such a tiny nation. But anyway, it's in the very, very center. It's just like a little dot on that map. It's a yellow piece. That's how small Israel is today. So as of now, the largest number of Jews in the world is in Israel, because they're all coming back. And not only are Jews returning to Israel, but there are also numerous people of all ages from around the world that are coming to visit this holy land. And we were on the trip where there was over 1,000 people, and they divided us all up into groups. And when we traveled around Israel, we stayed with the same group. We're all in the same bus. So this is our group. We were bus number 15. So we're all in this picture somewhere. There's Lloyd, and there's Karen and Heather. And this is our tour guide right there, Aura. She's our tour guide. And there's Tim in the back, and Jody. That's me, and our son Daniel, and Wayne. I think I got everybody, and Ethel. Oh, Rose, can't forget Rose. There's Rose. I think I got everybody. There's 11 of us that went. And in the middle is Dr. David Jeremiah. We're all standing on the Mount of Olives overlooking Jerusalem. And that's what our tour guide told us. Like she said, there's people from all ages coming to the Holy Land now. And this is a picture of our tour guide. Her name's Aura Sofer. She was a lady who was full of knowledge. She used to live in France. And because she's Jewish, she got to go back to Israel. That's where she lives now, her promised land. She's in the promised land, and she's doing tours. And this is something she said, and I wrote it down as soon as she said it. She said, there is something that's attracting the whole planet to come to Israel. The nations are coming. And I remember when she said that, she was so excited. She had a lot of excitement in her voice. She was so happy that everyone was there visiting her promised land. So people have a desire to see this land of the Bible. And I know I've had a desire to see it for many years. And Wayne was like, yeah, we should go there sometime. But we always usually just go on one trip every year. And it's usually somewhere where we can go and escape in the winter for a week and be on a beach. But last year, we thought maybe we'd go to Hawaii, and then I don't know what happened, but he was on his computer looking up stuff, and then he said, like, how would you like to go to Israel? So something changed. He wanted to go to Israel too. And here we are, we're in the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem. That's part of our group, and you can see Tim and Heather in the background looking in the store window. Yeah, looks like Tim's had a bottle of Coke. What's that? Yeah, it looks like Tim has a bottle of Coke. Yeah. So just last year, in 2018, there were 4 million tourists who had visited Israel. And like I mentioned before, how there's boycotts on their products. And right now there's a movement that's spreading throughout the world. It's called the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions, BDS. And it's a group, they're trying to fight Israel, like they're not using weapons, they're not using rockets and bullets and terrorist attacks. They're fighting Israel by trying to crush their economy. And so that's why I mentioned before that products that come out of the central part of Israel, that Judea and Samaria area, that area that the media refuses to say Judea and Samaria, they'll say West Bank. Products that come out of that in different countries, they'll have to have a yellow sticker on it so people can decide if they want to support these Jewish people or not. It'll be on their barcode. And also part of that movement, that BDS movement, it's the Airbnb, they're part of that movement. And what they're doing is they refuse to list places to stay that's in that Judea and Samaria area. So they're trying to crush their economy so tourists won't come. That's what Airbnb is doing, but it isn't working because the tourism industry is booming in Israel, because we know that God is on their side. And I just made some notes here. I said, tourism makes a huge contribution to Israel's economy and employment. 40% of the 4 million tourists are returning visitors to Israel. Not just first-time visitors, but returning visitors. And 61% of those tourists are Christians. And in February 2019, Jerusalem was named the fastest growing tourism destination in the world. So when we were in Israel, we took lots of pictures, and I was trying to find a way to put them into these slides because I thought people would like to see the places we went. So this is where I put them, where we're talking about tourism and how tourism's increasing. So the next slide, you'll see pictures of places that we visited. Like if you were a tourist in Israel, these are places that you could go. Okay, this one is Caesarea Philippi. In Israel, they pronounce it Caesarea, so maybe that's the proper pronunciation. They pronounce it Caesarea. But Caesarea Philippi, that's where Peter answered Jesus' question when he said, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" And Peter said, "You are the Messiah, sent from God." And that's in Luke 9, verse 18 to 21. And if you go to Israel, you can go to the Western Wall to pray. That's what we talked about when we did the Jerusalem session. Jerusalem used to have a retaining wall around it, and when the Romans came and destroyed it, they destroyed everything, but they left just that small part of the wall to show how powerful they are. That wall is still there today. It's over 2,000 years old. So if you go to Israel, you can have the opportunity to pray at the Western Wall. So there's my son Daniel and Wayne, and then there's me with my mother and her sisters, and over here, that's me and my Aunt Ethel praying at the wall. And if you go to Israel, you can sail on the Sea of Galilee. So we were in these boats, sailing on the Sea of Galilee. We mentioned that when we talked about Jesus in the Holy Land. And there's that Mount Arbel, the highest point, and around the Sea of Galilee. And you can also walk along the shores of the Sea of Galilee. And there's my mother and her sisters that very first morning. They got up really early, long before breakfast, to go for a walk. And if you're in Israel, you can visit the Garden of Gethsemane. And this is Tel Dan. It's Abraham traveled to Dan to rescue his nephew Lot. There's lots of different archaeological sites that you can visit. Beth Shan, over the years, many settlers built on top of the existing ruins, and this created a hill called a tell. I think I mentioned that last week. So under this hill, there would be the remains of the buildings, because they just keep building on top of buildings, but they haven't done the excavations here yet. And there's steps that'll lead up to it, and we climbed the steps. There's 190 steps going up to that tell. And down below, that used to be a Roman city. It was a wealthy Roman city, and it existed during the time of Christ. But then it was later destroyed in an earthquake when some Muslims lived there. It was destroyed in an earthquake. And this is on top of that tell. There's part of our bus group there. It says, this is on top of the tell in Beth Shan. King Saul, Israel's first king, he was hung on the city wall that overlooked this area. And he was killed on Mount Gilboa. And you can see right here, that was Mount Gilboa. That's where King Saul and his son Jonathan was killed. And it was an insult to the Jewish religion to have the bodies of their people hanging on the wall, because they always bury their dead within 24 hours. So the building that they hung them on would at one time be under this tell. So they hung them on the outside of the wall. So the Jewish people feel that since we are made in the image of God, we shouldn't see the dead decay. And I read somewhere online that this tree was planted here to commemorate the place where King Saul and his sons were hung on the city wall. And then that tree was later used in a 1970 movie about Jesus when they staged Judas's death, right there. And Mount Gilboa, in the Bible, King David, he was really upset because his best friend Jonathan died on that mountain. So he he said he'd like to curse the mountain. So there'd be no dew and no rain, nothing would grow there. And to this day, that mountain has a lot of bare areas. The Jewish people are trying to plant trees, but there's a lot of areas where there's nothing on it. And if you go to Israel, you can also go to this place. It's in the middle of a desert. It's way up on a mountain in the middle of a desert along the shores of the Dead Sea. And Herod the Great, that was King Herod. They call him Herod the Great because he was a great builder. He had a winter palace on top of this mountain that was in the middle of a desert. And later, Jews hid here to flee from the Romans in 70 AD. So when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem, some Jewish people came here. And they stayed there for 3 years on top of that mountain in the middle of the desert before the Romans came.
When we were there, they explained to us also that this was also King Herod's escape route out of Israel.
Oh, was it? Escape route?
Yes, was his escape route if there was any big problems in Jerusalem.
Nice. Yep. There's so much to learn, isn't there? It's like it's never ending. And it contained water cisterns that would store water. So when it rained, it collected water. So they had water and they had gardens there. They would grow plants that had something to eat. So the Jewish people stayed there for 3 years. They had everything they needed for 3 years, and it even had a swimming pool.
They told us that the water in those cisterns there was enough in there to last for 10 years.
10 years, wow. Yep. They were really deep, eh?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, that was very interesting. So if you go to Israel, you can go to visit Masada. And this is how you get there. I found that kind of freaky. The picture on the left, if you want, you can climb up the path. Yeah, it's a snake path. You can climb up the path, or you can go on this cable car. I personally didn't like it in there, but I looked around me. Everybody seemed calm, like it didn't bother them. So we were all squished in there. Because I was thinking, I don't want to die this way. But we were there. So I don't like being up in high places. And if you go to Israel, you can ride a camel. So there's Wayne on a camel, and there's Karen. And that's the Dead Sea in the background. And the next one is a video of Karen on a camel. There we go. Yeah.
It was really an opportunity because it was like $5 to get on this camel to ride it. I mean, like what can you do in Jerusalem for $5? And it was such an opportunity, but getting off was really interesting because the camel would lean down, he would get down to his knees, and then he would have to bow down to get down on the front knees, right? So it was like you're just hanging on, hoping that you're not going to head down into the sand.
Yeah, and there's no warning that the camel goes down and you could go head first.
Yeah.
They don't warn you that ahead of time. And I do have a picture of Wayne going down. He was like, whoa. But I didn't put that on there. I probably should have.
Oh, you should have.
Yeah, I should have.
Yes, bring it next week.
Okay. And if you go to Israel, another thing you can do is you can stand on the Mount of Olives, the place where Jesus ascended into heaven and where he's going to return. There's Tim and Heather on the Mount of Olives. In Caesarea, it was here in Caesarea that God first included us in his plan when the first Gentile got saved. That's Cornelius. That was in Acts 11, verse 18. And that was one of David Jeremiah's sermons. He was talking about Cornelius being saved. And it was also here in Caesarea that Paul spent 2 years in prison. And Pontius Pilate lived here in Caesarea. It's right on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. And the theater that was there, that was built by Herod the Great. It's on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. It was a very beautiful area. And this theater that Herod the Great had built, it's still in use today. They just refurbished the steps, and we got to sit there and listen to David Jeremiah preach a sermon. And we all got baptized in the Jordan River. There's all our pictures getting baptized. And while we were there, my son Daniel, he took some videos of people getting baptized and he put them together. I'll show you that next. But he didn't have a video of everybody, so he used pictures for some of them. Yeah. I like this one, Lloyd. Water comes out of his nose when he gets up. Yeah. Yeah, we didn't have videos for the other people. Yeah, she wasn't gonna get her hair cut, or her hair wet, I mean. There, that's it. And this guy here that was baptizing us, he works at David Jeremiah's church. He does some of the preaching there. His name is Tim Brown from California. And if you go to Israel, you can visit the Garden Tomb. And I remember, I think it was last week, Jody was telling us that was his big wow of the trip, going into that tomb where they had laid Jesus' body and it's empty. So there's Jody coming out of the tomb. And there's Karen on the right, she's coming out of the tomb, and there's Lloyd, like, it looks like he's trying to help that guy so he doesn't bump his head on the top. And if you go to Israel, you can go for a swim in the Dead Sea. And we're going to talk about that later. It's a very salty body of water. There's my mother there, you just lay there and you float. You don't have to kick or move your arms, you just float. And there's Wayne, I was putting mud on him because the mud is supposed to be very good for your skin. We'll talk about that when we do that other session. Yeah. I don't think he liked that too much. I got some of it in his mouth, he said. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it was very salty. I remember I put my finger in the Sea of Galilee, and I just got one drop, and I put it on my tongue, and it felt like I had a spoonful of salt in my mouth, just from that one drop of water. So if you go to Israel, you can visit Nazareth Village. You can see what life was like during the time of Christ. I mentioned that when we did that session on Jesus in the Holy Land. And you can go to Mount Carmel. And Mount Carmel means vineyard. Stand on top of Mount Carmel, that's mentioned in the Old Testament. And there's lots of places to shop. This is in Jerusalem. And I remember lots of places to shop. And I remember Karen, like that was her wow moment. She went into a jewelry store and she bought a necklace that has the whole Bible on a microchip, so she can wear the Bible around her neck. Yeah. And this is Tim. I remember that was his wow moment. He was in a store, and this lady put a prayer shawl on him. You can talk to him about it. Put up all the details. But she put a prayer shawl on him, and then she prayed over him. Yeah. And then I have a video of that. Yeah. And then I have a video of that right here. And then I have one more
for,
picture
the tourism section.
for
It's a
the
picture
tourism
that Wayne
section.
took, and
And
he said,
it's a
"Pat, you
picture
gotta
that
put
Wayne
this
took, and he
picture
said, Pat, you
in the
gotta put this
presentation
picture
somewhere." So I put it
in the
here.
presentation
It's a
somewhere, so I
picture
put it here.
of,
It's a
two
picture
people from our
of,
group are on a bus.
two people
And we were
from our
sitting
group
on the
are on a
They give us
bus,
a headset
and we were
to wear,
sitting on the
'cause as
bus,
we're
they give us a
driving through
headset to
Israel,
wear, because
the
as
tour
we're driving
guide,
through
she's
Israel,
always
the
teaching
tour
us,
guide,
so the bus
she's
is
always
kinda like a
teaching us,
classroom.
so the
We're
bus is
sitting
kind
there
of
and
like
we're
a
listening to the
classroom.
tour guide as
We're
the bus
sitting there and
driver's
we're listening
driving,
to the tour
and
guide
there's
as
a
the
couple
bus
people
driver's
that were not
driving,
paying
and there's a
attention,
couple
so
people
Wayne
that
has a
were not
picture
paying
of it.
attention, so Wayne has a picture of it.
They were having a nap, and that happened
Yeah,
more
they were
than
having
once,
a
'cause I
nap,
have a
and
picture
that
too of a
happened more
different
than
day
once,
that
because I have a
happened.
picture too of a different day that happened.
But to
And,
be truthful, we all probably did that from
But to
time
be
time
truthful, we
because
all probably
they
did
had
that
us
from
up
time to
early in the
time,
morning,
because
like, whether
they
we
had us
wanted
up
it or
early
not,
in the
there was a
morning, like
wake-up
whether
call
we
in our
wanted
room,
it or not, there
getting
was a
us up,
wake-up
and we
call
had
in our
15
room,
minutes to get
getting
down
us
to
up, and we had
breakfast.
15 minutes to get down to breakfast. So therefore, I had to get up before the wake-up call. I couldn't get ready in 15 minutes, and like every day was just like go, go, go. Have breakfast, get on the bus, and it was busy because they wanted us to see everything that we could see while we were in Israel, and we still didn't see everything. There's a lot more to see.
They had us very busy, so once in a while, maybe
They had
we
us
did
very
need a
busy,
nap.
so once in a while, maybe we did need a nap.
Okay, from that I'll move on to another
Okay, from that I'll move on
It's the
to another
miracle
miracle.
of the Jews
It's the
maintaining their
miracle
identity.
of the Jews
Because
maintaining
in
their
the Old
identity.
Testament, there's lots
Because
of
in
groups of
the Old
ancient people
Testament, there's
mentioned,
lots of groups of
but
ancient
there's only
people
one
mentioned,
that exists today, and
but
it's the
there's
Jewish
only
people.
one that
The other
exists
ones have
today,
all
and it's the
vanished.
Jewish people. The other ones
So
have
that's a
all
miracle
vanished.
in itself that we still have
So
the
that's a
Jewish
miracle
people.
in itself, that we still have the Jewish
So
people.
I said, not only is it a miracle.
So I
that
said,
the
not
Jews are
only is it a
returning to their
miracle
homeland,
that the Jews
it's
are
also a
returning to their
miracle that the
homeland,
Jewish
it's
people
also
have
a
survived
miracle
as a
that the
group.
Jewish people have survived
There's
as a
Jewish
group.
people with their prime
There's a
minister.
Jewish people with their prime minister.
Yep, Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yep, Benjamin
And in biblical
Netanyahu.
times, many ancient
And in
groups of
biblical
people
times,
have been
many
mentioned,
ancient
but
groups
they
of
have
people
all
have been
disappeared.
mentioned, but they have
except
all
the
disappeared.
Jewish people.
All
And
except
that's
the
because
Jewish
God has
people.
big plans for them.
And that's because God has big
Even
plans
though they
for
were
them.
scattered around the world,
So even though
some
they were
of them would
scattered around the world,
intermarry, and
some of them would
they still
intermarry,
exist.
and they still exist.
So God miraculously kept them intact.
So God
as a
miraculously
civilization
kept them
after they had
intact
been
as a
scattered across the
civilization
planet
after they had been
for over
scattered across
2,000
the
years.
planet
And this
for
all
over
happened
2,000 years.
because God
And this
has
all
remarkable
happened
plans for the
because
land
God
of
has
Israel
remarkable
and for his
plans for the
Jewish
land of
people.
Israel and for his Jewish people.
And then from that,
And
I'll
then
end with a
from
song.
that,
It's a
I'll
song
end
and
with
it
a
has
song.
lots of
It's a
scriptures in it.
song and it has lots of
It'll,
scriptures in it.
Have the
It just,
scripture
it'll,
recorded on the bottom.
have
but
the
it's about
scripture
Jewish
recorded on the
people all
bottom,
coming
but
back
it's
to
about
their
the
promised
Jewish
land.
people
There's
all
lots of
coming
pictures.
back to their promised land. There's lots of pictures.
And I wrote last night, I sat down and I wrote down all
wrote
those
last night, I
scriptures.
sat
So
down and I
if-
wrote down
if
all
you're
those
like me
scriptures. So
and you want it,
if you're like me
looked at it
and you
I
want
think,
it,
wow, what does that
because
scripture
I
say?
looked
What
at it
does
and I
that
think,
say? It just kind of
wow, what does that
flashes through
scripture
them
say?
and
What
you
does that
don't
one say?
really
It just
see
kind
them.
of flashes
But
through
last
them and
night
you
I
don't
took
get to
time and
really
I
see
kept
them.
pausing the
But
song
last
and
night
I
I
wrote them
took
all down.
time
So
and I kept
if you
pausing the
want
song
that,
and I
you
wrote
just
them all
let me
down.
know and
So
I'll type up
if
a
you
copy.
want that, you can just let me know and I'll type up a copy.
Because there's lots of scriptures
Okay.
about promises about
Because
the
there's
Jewish
lots of
people.
scriptures about promises
So
about
I'll
the
end with
Jewish
this.
people. So I'll
And
end
then
with
you can
this.
have the tea and that Jewish.
And then you can have the tea and
the
that
popular
Jewish,
dessert,
the popular Jewish dessert, hava.
Oh, daughters of Zion. Oh, daughters of Zion. Oh, Abraham's son. Hear the words of your father. Hear the words of your father. Hear his promise of love. Hear his promise of love. I will make you a blessing. I will make you a blessing. So count the stars if you can. So count the stars if you can. You will be a great nation. I will give you this land. But don't fear, oh my daughter, or sons of